Well, hello, we're so excited to have you all with us and welcome to the first webinar for the 2022 iteration of the Young Pacific Leaders, also known as YPL Small Grants Program. I know many of you on our webinar today, but in the case you're joining via recording, we've not had the chance to meet. My name is Phoebe Hybeck and I am the Senior Program Development Officer on the Program Development Team at Cultural Vistas, who helps support the 2022 YPL Small Grants iteration. I'm also joined by my colleague, Haley Clemson, who also supports the YPL Small Grants program. For those who haven't worked with Cultural Vistas before, I'll share a little bit of context to give you a little bit of information about the organization and how we integrate with the YPL Small Grants program. Cultural Vistas is a nonprofit international exchange organization and the implementing partner for the YPL Small Grants program for 2022. The program is funded by the U.S. Department of State, and it's made possible, again, by the U.S. Department of State, but through the U.S. mission to New Zealand. This is really important to note because all of the YPL Small Grants program deadlines and times will be synced with the New Zealand time zone. So for any of the program deadlines or dates, they'll all be synced to New Zealand time, which is really important to note, especially for the application deadline and the times of the webinar. The YPL Small Grants Program is a program that's under the YPL initiative, which you all are very familiar with, but in the case not, it's a youth leadership development initiative that's organized by the U.S. Department of State. In 2018, the YPL Small Grants Program was launched, and so far this will be, it's had 3 iterations. This will be the next and most current. And through the YPL Small Grants Program, YPL alumni have the opportunity to apply for small grant funding to implement innovative projects throughout the Pacific region that are focused on improving communities, countries, and the region in one or more of the YPL program's core pillars. And those pillars are education, environment and resource management, economic and social development, and civic leadership. So to help anyone who's interested in preparing to apply for this year's iteration of the Small Grants Program, we'll be hosting these preparation webinars over the next few weeks to provide information and guidance to help you with your application and project organization. It's also a great chance to ask any questions that you might have. This first webinar is intended to help interested teams better understand what's required for the application, the program, and also how to write a compelling and competitive proposal application. There'll be 2 other webinars focused on project organization, work plans, and team responsibilities, and then developing a thorough and detailed budget, as well as budget justification narrative. Each of these is really set to help answer your questions and also support your application and proposal submission development. All webinars will be held at the same time, 9:00 a.m. New Zealand time via Zoom. So the access information that you use today is the access information that you'll use for all of the remaining webinars. The next webinar will be on August 18th, and the third and final webinar will be on the 25th of August. The most important deadline to remember is the application deadline, and that deadline is August 29th, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. So definitely make note of that. I'll say it probably about 100 more times throughout the series of the webinars, but just in the case, want to make sure that that is a deadline you're all aware of. Again, webinar attendance is not required, however, strongly encouraged, especially so if you have questions, if this is your first proposal that you've ever submitted, this will really help outline for you the information needed, as well as help answer any questions. And this is a great way to get some insight on submitting a proposal. And much of the information that's shared during the webinars is actually replicable for any other grant opportunity you might be interested in going after. So it's really a great immersive learning opportunity to really get to know what you should be including in a competitive proposal application. Like I said previously, there will be recordings available, and we do encourage you, if you're not able to attend, to watch those recordings, as they'll also be able to help you with your proposal submission and development. So for those of you joining today live, at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A. Once we get to that section of the webinar, just go ahead and raise your hand or unmute, and we'll go to you for your questions. You're also welcome to submit your questions in the chat throughout the webinar, and I'll answer those at the end of our session today. For anyone who's unable to attend and tuning in via the recording, you can email your questions to yplgrants@culturalvistas.org, and those will be answered and possibly discussed in the next webinar as well. So with all of the housekeeping aside, let's go ahead and jump right in. I'd like to walk you through what is being shared on screen. You'll find a brief program timeline for this iteration of the YPL Small Grants Program. As I mentioned, the webinars will take place leading up to the program application deadline. The remaining webinar dates will be August 18th and the 25th at 9:00 a.m. New Zealand time via Zoom using the same login information you joined us with today. The webinar topics, so webinar number 2 will include organizing a project and the core project team, and then budget creation and project management. Today's webinar is focused on how to develop and create a compelling grant proposal. Again, I know I said I'd say this 100 times. Here's the second time, maybe the third or the fourth. Also listed in the timeline is the application deadline, which I know many of us span across varying time zones. So it is important to note that it's August 29th at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. From there, the expected notification time of selected applicants will be in September of 2022. So just following not too long after the application closes. And the way that you'll be notified, Cultural Vistas will notify both selected projects and non-selected projects via email. Once the selected grantees are finalized and teams have confirmed their participation, Cultural Vistas will actually begin to arrange all of the travel for the 3 core team members to attend the mandatory kickoff workshop in Auckland, New Zealand. And this will be held over the dates November 7th through the 8th in 2022. That is not inclusive of the travel dates. So depending on where you're coming from throughout the Pacific, that will depend on what date you arrive and leave Auckland. And this kickoff workshop will really be set to prepare the selected core team members for the beginning of the implementation of the small grant project. Again, attendance for this kickoff workshop is required for all 3 team members. So it's really important that if you're thinking about applying, that you have availability to attend over those dates. Teams selected, just after they attend the kickoff workshop, they'll begin implementing their projects starting in November 2022, all the way through May 2023. I know that seems very far away, but I promise that time will fly by. Once the project implementation period is complete, Cultural Vistas will again arrange your travel logistics for a debriefing seminar, and this will just solely be for the project team leader. And the seminar will be set to discuss the learning challenges and successes of the project, as well as prepare project leaders for the small grant showcase. This is currently projected for June 2023 in Auckland, New Zealand. And again, all core team members will be required to attend this seminar. Not to worry, the expenses for participation in the kickoff and debriefing events are covered by the YPL Small Grants Program and do not need to be included in the small grant project budget for your proposed project. And Cultural Vistas will make all the arrangements, and again, team attendance is required. So to start thinking about your project and application, I want to direct everybody to the YPL Small Grants Program website. And that website is culturalvistas.org/YPL. You'll see on screen, this is what we have. And on this webpage, there are several frequently asked questions or FAQs outlined, as well as the downloadable budget that will help you prepare your application and project development. So you'll see in this section, all of the information that we'll cover in the webinars can also easily be accessed here. In the case, you have a question. If it's a more general question, I definitely think that this is a great place for you to refer to. If it's a more specific question, obviously our team is available via email. This is also where you'll be able to access the recorded webinars, and they'll be posted in the following week. So you'll see that there are previous ones from last year. As soon as this one is ready to go, we'll have that uploaded into our YouTube playlist for viewing through this website. So to access the online application, you'll follow the link that was previously sent via email. You'll also can see it on screen at the moment, and it's also posted in the YPL Alumni Facebook group. If you're not in the Facebook group, you can go ahead and send a request to join through that page, and Mara Hosoda at the U.S. Consulate in Auckland will go ahead and give you access to that Facebook group. But like I said, this was also sent via email. So whichever way you found the information about the webinar today, there should be a link associated. And if you do have any questions, you can also find it on screen. And I'll just reiterate again that it's https://bit.ly/2022 YPL SMG application. So lots of places to access it. If you can't find it or you have problems accessing it, just go ahead and send us an email and we can provide you the link directly. For any issues accessing the online application, or if you need a PDF application, we do have those available, and they'll be provided upon request. So just send that request to yplgrants@culturalvistas.org. That's the email address for all support needs for this program. So to the application itself, as I shared all of the different ways to access the program application, this is what it will look like. And from there, you'll see that one of the things I'd like to highlight for you is, and this is a standard before applying for any grant submission or proposal, submitting any proposal that you might have. It's really important to ensure that you're eligible to participate in the program and that you understand the requirements for the project application, the proposal, and the program timeline. The eligibility requirements are listed at the top of the page or at the top of the application, but just to reiterate, they're as follows. So at least one team member must be a former YPL conference attendee. All 3 core team members can be YPL alumni or just one. It doesn't have to be all 3. There can be 2, there can just be 1. As long as there's 1, you meet that eligibility requirement. All core team members must be between the ages of 20 to 35. And this is something that we do strictly enforce for the program. So if you're outside of that time or that age range, unfortunately, you're not eligible. Projects must address at least one of the 4 YPL pillar themes. So that is education, economic and social development, civic leadership, and environment and resource management. I know you all are very familiar with that. So your projects are very familiar with that information. So your projects do need to meet at least one. It can meet all if that is the case, and many do, but that is something that is a requirement. For U.S. citizens, it's important that your project demonstrate that it is Pacific regionally focused outside of the United States. And this could be being a part of a cross-country team. So maybe it's an exchange between Hawaii and Fiji, or another Pacific country that you're interested in, or you could provide a cultural exchange element. And the reason this is it's due to the U.S. federal regulations that are outlined by the funding that makes this program possible. If you have any questions about that, we're also happy to provide any insight we can into that. The core team members, or the core project team members, is what we refer to them as. So the project leader, project treasurer, and project secretary are required to attend the kickoff workshop in Auckland, New Zealand. this November. And then project leaders are also required to attend the debriefing seminar in June 2023. All projects need to match or demonstrate a program timeframe matching the YPL small grants implementation period, which will begin following the kickoff workshop and go through May 2023. Unfortunately, previous YPL small grants program core team members, so anyone who was a project leader, a project treasurer, or a project secretary previously, are ineligible to reapply. At the top of the application, you will also note overview information, and most notably, a reminder that while you are eligible to apply for funding up to $10,000 US, you must be able to demonstrate in your budget the anticipated expenses that match the funding you are requesting. So your expenses in your budget need to match the funding you're requesting. So you don't have to request the full $10,000. If your project does require that much, that's totally fine, as long as you can outline why it requires that much. But it is not an expectation or a requirement that you have to meet $10,000. Let's say your project idea is only $5,000. That's totally fine. And we request that you submit the budget or request the funds that you know you'll need for the project. All projects really need to, demonstrate a time frame matching the small grants implementation period. And it's really important to note that that time frame flies by. And one of the things that is important and that we emphasize with the YPL small grants program is, again, the 3 core team members. And it's really, really important for you to have that in your team. And this is required for several reasons. But most importantly, having the 3 core team members helps divide responsibilities and also keeps the project balanced and shares the heavy workload across the team and project. You'll find on the application that there is a description of the role for the 3 core team members. So if you have any questions about that, it is found on the application. Applying with less than 3 core team members does not demonstrate project sustainability. So if you don't have 3 team members, we strongly encourage that you find another core team member to fill the 3rd role. Again, everyone on the team does not have to be a YPL alumni, but at least one core team member does. And that can be anyone serving in the 3 positions. So if your alumni is a treasurer or a secretary, that's totally fine. If they're the leader, that's fine as well. Regarding the treasurer position, they do not have to have a bank account with an already established nonprofit or registered organization. They must have a valid bank account, though, that can receive transfers from the US. We'll discuss more on the core team members and organizing a project in the 2nd webinar next week. But for now, it's important to remember that as you put together your project proposal, you should include all required aspects of the application and project. And like I said, this program mimics your typical grant application process. And so it's really important to note that for highly competitive grant funding opportunities, having all of these requirements met and included in your application and project, it really signals that you're able to comply with the requirements, as well as shows your ability to follow the structure and the requests from the funding agency. So again, this is just one of those best practices that we've found throughout the years in our work with grants and applying for and managing them. Once you're confirmed that you're eligible to apply and participate, it's time to review what the application and proposal should look like and include, as well as the dates surrounding the application. The online application that you're looking at, this is the form, and the online form itself is the first of 5 required pieces for your proposal submission. So think of them as your proposal package that you'll need to submit in order to have a fully submitted proposal. And a completed YPL small grant application includes the fully completed online application, so this online form, resumes of all of your core team members, a project abstract, which is a maximum of 100 words, a project description, which is a maximum of 1,000 words, and then a completed project budget, which is a budget that has an amount up to $10,000 US. The first section of the online application is for background information on the core project team. So you'll see that asking about all of the different team members that will be supporting your project. The project leader is the overall head of the project that you're proposing and is in charge of the project implementation during the grant period. This individual will be the main person that's in contact with Cultural Vistas for project updates and can submit the application information on behalf of the other core project team members or in tandem with them as the application is completed. The project treasurer will handle all of the program finances, and this person should be incredibly trustworthy and organized, and again, needs to have a bank account that is able to receive funds, as well as someone who is very organized and can keep all of the receipts and detail expenses for grant funds. And the project secretary is the person who will complete and submit all of the monthly reports and track the updates on the project. Like I said, we'll share more about this structured next week, but it is important to note that failure to provide the up-to-date information about the status of the project and having a team that can keep in line with all of the requirements of the program could result in a loss of funding. So it's really important that as you're thinking about compiling your team, or you're thinking about the questions that you might have for the webinar next week, to consider this and really make a very informed and considerate decision on who's going to be supporting the team, just because it is a lot of work and we want to make sure that you have, your strongest support system in place as you prepare to implement your projects. All right, so the information that you provide for each person on the core team needs to match the passports for each of the core team members as you are filling out the form. So especially the name, the birth date, all of those things, as we'll be using, like I said, this information to help us book your travel arrangements to the kickoff workshop and then later on the debriefing seminar. It's also critically important to provide the application, the email address you and your teams your team members that you will have on your core team, the email address that you most frequently check and is active. This is how we'll contact selected applicants. And once we have this email address, that is how we'll communicate all program related details too. So it's very important that you use the email address that you check most frequently. And once you complete the team information, the next section of the YPL Small Grant Program is the YPL Small Grant Program information. So here you'll need to include the name of your project, what YPL pillar or theme your project is associated with, and a brief description of your team's involvement with YPL. So if you attended the 2021-2022 conference, this is where you would put that information, or the 2019 conference, or maybe you participated in the YPL IVLPs that have taken place, or a regional workshop. This is where you would share that information. We also would like information on the country or countries or territories that your project will be taking place in. So we need you to be sure to fill out this section. And then you'll get to almost to the end of the application, the document upload section. And this next section allows applicants to upload all of the required documents and supporting documents for the proposed project. The first 5 attachments are required for the completed application, but the final upload can be any additional information you would like to provide. The document can be submitted in Word doc, PDF, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints, JPEG photos, etc. We just ask that you make sure that they're all in the same format, just so we can definitely access them. Sometimes when they're different formats, they don't upload, and so we won't be able to review them. I'll share a little bit about the information required in each of the sections, starting with the project abstract. And again, this is a required piece of the proposal. And this should be a brief summary of your project. 100 words or less. You need to describe in the abstract the main goal of your project, the main audience your project will be working with, and what it is you will be doing. The abstract should be looked at as your elevator pitch, if you will, and it needs to be concise and provide just enough detail that someone without a lot of background on your project idea would be able to understand what you're doing. So this is the overview that will be used to outline and highlight your project if selected. So again, it really needs to be concise and explain your project directly. The project description is the next required section or upload, and this is also where you can go into more detail about your project and a narrative on the work plan and the steps that you'll be taking to achieve your goal. Here, you can also provide some details as to the funding amount you're requesting as it relates to your project goals. This is where you can describe the longer term impact and plans of your project. In comparison to the first abstract, you have 1,000 words in this section to provide a thorough and compelling overview of your project. And a YPL alumni, Nate Chong-Mi, had some very wise words in terms of submitting an application, putting this together. Because this is such a small amount, we do get a lot of feedback that we wish there was more space to share. And his feedback was, if you're having trouble providing the description in 1,000 words, your idea is probably too big and needs to be kind of concise down to meet the timeline in the 6-month implementation period of the project. So wise words from YPL alumni Nate Chong-Mi, but this is really your chance to provide a thorough and compelling overview of your project and to really help you also outline what you're doing with your project and what you hope to do with the funds. So for both the project abstract and project description, you can include headers and footers, and those don't count in the word count. It is recommended that you do provide some kind of branding to your documents that you upload. Anything that, helps really have your proposal shine is something that's recommended. So it is totally fine if you want to provide some branding on there. We do recommend that other than the resumes and budgets, it can be on all of the documents you submit associated with your project. So from there, we'll also need all the resumes of your core team members, and these should be no more than 2 pages in each. And we do recommend keeping with that 2-page limit as we want to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the proposal. And again, this is standard across all, or I should say many grant application processes. And so it's really important that you're meeting that metric and not providing any more pages. For the budget, it's required that applicants use the budget template we provide, and you'll see here there is a downloadable version, and that will click into a spreadsheet that you can download and go ahead and populate with your budget information. And in the last webinar on week 3, we'll go through the budget template and all of the information you'll need. It's very important that you plan to use this budget template and really think about, as you're putting together your budget, the amount of money as it's being requested and making sure that it matches the work plan that you're putting together. Again, you can apply, all applicants can apply for up to $10,000 US, but you should really only apply for what is needed for you to implement your project work plan. So if you only need $500, only apply for $500. And how you'll get to this is by doing a lot of research on the different aspects that you'll need included in your project. And like I said, in webinar number 3, we'll go into the budgeting process in depth, but just some food for thought as you're starting to really put together all of your project proposal information and starting to build out the foundation of your project. For the last required document, we request that you upload the photo page or the biometric page of your passports for all core team members. And your passports will need to be valid through December 31st, 2023 in order to attend the debriefing seminar. And then for the last of the uploads, you'll note there is an option for other supporting documents. And again, this is totally optional. It can be up to 5 pages of other optional documents you think help make the case for your project. And some things that this could include, this is not inclusive of what can be included, but just an idea, a PowerPoint, a worksheet, a budget narrative, photos, mock-ups of agendas. I do appreciate the budget narrative aspect of this because it does help outline, the expenses and that you've really thought through. So that is something that, could be a really easy way to help support the budget that you've put forth. But this should only be 5 pages in total. So whatever supporting documentation you'd like to provide should only be 5 pages in total. And if you are using different mediums, so let's say you're using Excel, Word, and then JPEGs, you should combine them into one final document to upload. This is just to make sure that everything gets through to us. PDF is always something that is always a format that works really well. If you have any issues with the submissions, just let us know. But that basically is what you can upload in the supporting document section. And then finally, the last section of the application asks that you check the boxes and sign noting that you agree to the terms and conditions of participating in the YPL Small Grants Program. So once you're finished completing the form and uploading the documents, you'll go ahead and click submit. You will receive a submission confirmation upon clicking submit. Additionally, receiving an email as well. Please be sure that you received this notification. If we receive all of the above and you get that notification, you will have submitted a completed application. All right, so now that we've reviewed the application, I want to highlight some information for you about grant competitions and application preparation as you begin to start developing your project and complete the application. Before you can begin the application, it's really important to think about what you're applying for and how you're going to demonstrate your idea, the concept, and what your project is, and how it's going to have a measurable impact through your actionable work plan. It's important to remember that grant applications are very competitive. Everything that you submit, think about it being reviewed as a part of a whole package. It's important to make sure that the information is comprehensive, compelling, understanding to someone who has no previous context or information about your project. So who's ever reading your project proposal most often doesn't have previous information about your project idea. And so it's very important that you outline in a clear way your project idea, your project goal, what you're looking to do with the project. It's important that the proposal demonstrates how ready you are to implement the project as well. This means that you really have to describe the project in as much detail as possible, and you don't want the proposal reader to be left with any questions about your project because you won't be there to answer those questions, or provide clarity on your project idea. With grant funding, project selection is not a guarantee, and project submissions really need to make sure that the proposal meets the outline criteria and can explain the impact of the work you are aiming to do and complete. I know I've said that a bunch of times already, but this is such an important and critical aspect of submitting a proposal, because this is typically how grant applications are reviewed. And so it's really, really important that you read the outline criteria and the requirements for what you need to include in your proposal. And you also address each point and answer each question asked in the request for proposals. While you're developing your application and project submission, it's helpful to create a checklist of the items that you need to include in your proposal. And then before you submit the proposal, go through and check to make sure you've included all of those required items as well as that you've addressed all of the questions that were required for the application. Again, I know I've said this so much, and it may seem so simple, but it is very, very important, because if you don't answer a question or you don't include a required item, your proposal will not be competitive and often won't even be reviewed. So it's really, really important that you do meet all of this, all of the requirements, and provide all the requested information. So for example, if a request for a proposal requires you to include both an itemized budget and a budget narrative that explains how you expect to use the funds you're requesting, and you don't submit both pieces as a part of your application, then you'll lose points on your proposal, and the reviewer might not have the information needed to understand why you needed that specific line item or specific line items noted in your budget. It's also important to be realistic about the cost for your project and the timeline in which you can complete the project. As you're thinking about your project idea, you really need to think through the budget and the ability to accomplish the set out goals within the proposed budget and timeline. Small grant projects can focus on multiple problems or opportunities, and they should demonstrate how holistically the project addresses all of them. Don't try to propose something too big or costly. Again, it's really important to remember that the projects have to be implemented in a 6-month time frame, which is an incredibly short timeline for most projects. And then as you're putting together your proposal, you want to tell the story of your project. Keep it factual, keep it clear, but also you want to keep it compelling. Help the reviewer understand why you've created the project, what opportunity you're trying to create or provide, or what of your project, the more compelling your proposal will be. Thinking about it holistically at every step is so important, and so is illustrating that in your project. So again, what is the issue or the challenge? Why is it important? Why are you developing, implementing this project to address the challenge or create the opportunity? Also, what work has already been done? How are you going to solve or address the issue with the small grant funds or create the opportunity? And how can the work you would accomplish through the program be utilized post-grant period? Are there opportunities to sustain the grant beyond that you're thinking about now? Is your project scalable? These are things that really help support the case or really sing the case for your project idea. And then I'll just go through some tips that we have now that we've gone over the requirements and resources for the application. These are just some tips that we've kind of learned over the years of implementing this program, but also from our work on grant programs. And one of the biggest questions that we receive is the question, what is the small grants program looking for? And a lot of that is found in the eligibility requirements piece of the application. But most often, and especially with this program, we would love a program or a project that is associated with one of the YPL pillars. Again, so the project needs to be connected to either education, environment and resource management, civic leadership, or economic and social development. It doesn't necessarily have to directly align, but it's important to have a connection to one of those pillars. We realize that those pillars tend to be very broad, and there's a lot of different directions that you can take your project with connection to those pillars. And so it's important to make the connection as to how it supports one or more. Another tip is feasibility. I know I've said this a bunch of times as well, but it's really important to show that you have a plan for the 6 months implementation period for this program and that your budget matches what you're proposing and is reasonable. One of the biggest pieces of reflection, and this is why I've said it so many times, this is what we've received from previous grantees, is it's really important to keep it realistic in the project size and also understand the amount of time. I know the cheesy saying is time flies. It really is true, especially with this program. 6 months is not a long time. And we know that so many of you have really great ideas. Think about this as the start of something and how you can sustain the project afterwards. So let's say you have a massive project idea. This could be a great way of kicking off that idea and really getting it started and building it out within 6 months. And then you could add phases on. That's just an idea. If you do have, something big that you're looking to implement, this can be a great way to start that, something that fits within that time frame. And then similar on that note is sustainability and scalability. It's really important to note, again, that this is such a short time frame, but we do encourage everyone to think long-term for project impact. How can the small grants program further a project along or get a project off the ground? So considering either plans or ideas for the project to continue to impact your target community beyond the small grant funding timeframe. One of the things that you could ask yourself is, how can the project grow in size or impact beyond this small grants period? And this really helps to indicate a thoughtful and strategic project idea. Also, demonstrating why the funding from the 6 months of this project will impact a bigger strategy and help your communities for even longer. Program impact is also something you should include in the proposal, and it should help describe, who the project's target community of impact or audience is and how the project will positively impact that population. It's also important to note or to demonstrate that what you're doing in the time frame of the program. In your application, you can describe the continuation of the project and impact, which is also something we strongly encourage. As a reminder, we do welcome projects that have an emphasis on regional cooperation and collaboration. That can be harder to do in the planning and implementation process, but it is also an opportunity to increase your cross-cultural communication skills, project management skills, and also impact more communities. So we have had quite a few projects that work cross-country. We've had projects that span from Papua New Guinea to Fiji, as well as Hawaii to New Zealand, Samoa to American Samoa. So that is common to have projects that are across more than one Pacific location. So if that's something of interest, we definitely do encourage and support that. So if you're looking for different project examples or projects that have been funded previously, I encourage you to check out the section of the website that's currently on the screen. This is where you can read more about previous projects. So feel free to go ahead and click into each of the projects and you'll find their monthly postings here. Also on Facebook, we do have the YPL Small Grants spotlights, which can be found in the video section of the We Are Young Pacific Leaders Facebook page. All right, so I know that was a long presentation. Thanks for bearing with me. We have reached the end. I'll go ahead and address any of the questions you might